to the Falmouth Chamber of Commerce.
The Falmouth Chamber is dedicated to working on behalf of our members to make Falmouth a better place to live, work, and conduct business. We are committed to developing the economic, cultural, educational, and civic interests of our community and welcome the support from all organizations to achieve our combined goals. Whether you call Falmouth home, are a summer resident, or a visitor, we hope you take advantage of all that the Chamber has to offer.
People think that a locally owned and operated appliance store may not offer what they need. Actually, we have trained and dedicated sales associates, expert delivery and installation, professional repair service, and personal customer service. Plus, we have access to a huge local warehouse with over 6,000 models in stock. Crane Appliance. We call the Cape and Islands home. Carlson Printing for all your printing needs. 508-548-7303 or toll free at 1-800-696-7303. Our email address is carlsonprinting@aol.com. Carlson Printing for all your printing needs.
Hosting services for fctv.org are provided by MegaNet Communications. MegaNet offers a wide array of internet services including Mega Backup Cloud Service, server co-location, T1, fiber, Metro Ethernet, as well as telephone services such as hosted PBX and digital voice. Their number one goal is to keep your communications network up and running and allow you to focus on growing your business. 877-634-2638 or meganet.net.
Everybody, welcome to the Falmouth Board of Selectmen meeting for Monday, April 29. We're in the Selectmen's meeting room in open session, and we're going to start with a Pledge of Allegiance. So please rise. I
pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
We've got a kind of a special meeting tonight. We're going to introduce Judge Christopher Welch from the Falmouth Drug Court, and thereafter we're going to go to a long-awaited joint meeting on affordable housing, which is really focused on, you know, where do we go from here? What ideas folks have to actually get moving now that we've talked long and hard about affordable housing. The next item on the agenda is recognition. Selectman Vice Chair Megan English Braga.
Just wanted to, sometimes, you know, we have these fabulous positive recognitions and other times they're a bit more somber, and this is one of the latter. We are really just so sad to hear about the passing of Mary Schumacher, who was just a tremendous volunteer in this community. I think many of us were very surprised that she had been ill because she really continued to work and be dedicated to the work for the town. And really her presence, her thoughtfulness, her ability to kind of distill what Concom talks about, which can sometimes be really complex and complicated, and just really distill that and make that easier for all of us to understand. That will all be greatly missed. I know that Conservation, her board will really miss her influence and her presence, but we certainly as a board and as a community, you know, will miss her greatly. So we just want to hold her in our memories and just send our condolences to her family.
Thank you. Announcements, Ms. Braga.
We just were going to announce that on June 11th, we had talked about last meeting that we were going to have a community forum to talk a little bit about, to bring together Board of Health and Human Services, the Substance Abuse Commission, along with our elected state reps, our 2 state representatives and our state senator, to talk about some of the issues around sober homes in our community, to hear from the chief of police, to hear from fire, from our fire chief to hear about sort of what some of the challenges are, to get some accurate information out there, and to most importantly allow individuals to sort of express their concerns, their questions to our elected officials that are working on our behalf on Beacon Hill, and who really have it in their jurisdiction to make some changes around some of these issues. It's something that Doug Brown has kind of been, tapping us on the shoulder, reminding us that this is something a lot of people have questions about, and unfortunately there's lots of misinformation in the community, so it's going to be an opportunity for us to have that discussion, get some information, and give some feedback to our elected officials. So it's going to be June 11th at 6 p.m. at Falmouth High School. So again, a community forum, so everyone is welcome, and we hope folks will take the time to attend and to just ask your questions and hear some hopefully informative facts and just information about this important issue.
So the Board of Selectmen will attend, but it's hosted by the Health Department?
Well, I think I think the town manager is organizing, pulling it all together.
Correct.
And we've, Board of Health and
Mass Department of Public Health.
yeah, I think we're gonna have some other individuals who will attend. Human Services, everyone jumped on right away. As soon as we put it out there, there was a lot of enthusiasm from town departments and boards to be a part of it. So I think it'll be a really nice coming together of all the individuals who have some information and who can really speak to what's going on in the community and the things that they're seeing firsthand in terms of services provided to individuals in our town.
If I could just,
Sure,
I hope
please.
it's more than just the discussion about sober houses. I want it to be really a discussion about the whole recovery system and how it works and what we can do to improve it.
Appreciate both of you putting that together. Thanks so much.
Thank you.
The next item, any more announcements before I move on? Okay, seeing none. The next item is public comment. It's an opportunity for anyone in the audience to speak for 2 minutes on a subject that's not already on the agenda. Is there anyone here for public comment? Please, sir, right up to the podium and introduce yourself if you would. The microphone has to get you.
I'm good right here.
No, actually, we have to have you at the microphone. Thank you for that. Sorry for the inconvenience.
It just doesn't pick it up at home for anybody who's watching. They won't be able to hear you.
Welcome.
I am Stephen Knipple. My company is Here Now Enterprising. I represent Falmouth with my company because I'm going to put a youth center where the senior center is now. I would like to have that building for the youth, the future of Falmouth. They've been shortchanged a couple times with a youth center. The Gus Canny one was very good. I pushed to get that, and it was. But it's not ample area. And my area is going to be for all ages when the children are not there. They got to have the run of it for school, and they got to control it. They got to put it together. They're going to own it, and they're going to police it. I'll oversee things, and I'll speak with the police department in regards to what they want. I would like to have a dog, find in the pot, stuff like that. There's gonna be rules and regulations you're gonna have to agree to. And I would like all of you to listen to what I have to say eventually. The newspaper is very slow on saying anything because they want everything in writing, okay? I write, yes, there's a book I wrote called Pretty Bird, about life. About a pure white dove that came to me on the day I retired as a mechanic. It's what life is about. And it's a children's book. And I want all of you that have read it to share it with other people who would like to read it. I produced it. I paid for printing it, and I hand them out. I have another 36 coming. I have to work within my financial means because I'm retired on 3 incomes, and they just make it through the month with a little spending money on the side, and that's what the book came from.
Thank you very much. That's your 2 minutes. Appreciate the information, and thank
To be
you for
continued,
coming. Thank
whenever
you.
you'd like to. Ask me anything.
Thank you very much.
You're very welcome. Thank you all.
The next item on the agenda is a presentation on Falmouth Drug Court by the Honorable Judge Christopher Welch. Welcome, Judge Welch.
Should be all right.
Good evening, and thank you for inviting me here tonight. Appreciate it. I'd like to make a short, well, I was a lawyer, now I'm a judge, so when lawyers or judges say short, be a little cautious with that.
Settle in.
I'll settle in for a while now. But it's interesting. I spent 23 years as a rather hard-bitten Irish Catholic trial lawyer in Boston. And I came to the bench 12 years ago, primarily in Fall River. I sat there for about 8 years. And being a judge when I started was, I would say, a lot easier. It was a more traditional role, where a judge was separate, pretty much, from the population and ruled, guilty, not guilty, allowed, denied, whatever the case may be. Case would come before you, you would rule on it and move on to the next case. And sentencing was relatively straightforward. You assessed the crime, assessed the nature of the crime, and things like that, and other factors, the impact on the victim, the impact on society, and so forth. And it was rather straightforward in that way. And then about 6 years into the process of being a judge, things were different. Things changed. It became apparent in probably my 5th year that sentencing a person with substance use disorder, and I use that phrase didn't exist when I started. People with, back when I started 12 years ago, it'd be drug addicts. And then it changed. Over 5 years, I began seeing the same people again and again and again. And they were committing crimes such as theft, breaking and entering into cars, maybe a breaking and entering in empty homes, a lot of thievery, a lot of money crimes, a lot of crimes on their own families, credit card frauds, things like that. And you would see them, you could sentence them for 6 months, a year, or 2 years, and they would be back. And frankly, it made no sense to me. I didn't get it, because I'm like, what, I just sentenced you to 18 months. And in our system of justice, for every day you serve in a house of correction, you get 1 day as a credit, which frankly works because then there's an incentive to, frankly behave, and then you get some time off your sentence. But I would see the same people again. They would be reoffending within 30 days, 60 days, something like that. And that made no sense to me at all. And so I began talking to people in the drug court movement, which had not hit Massachusetts. It was in South Boston. Barnstable gave it a try and did pretty well, but it was difficult because there really wasn't a consensus on this. In fact, there was a certain level of antagonism towards it with the courts, in the sense that it looked like it was, I suppose, mollycoddling these defendants. But the problem was they began to continue doing these crimes, and then we began to notice, and I certainly did, the death rate was skyrocketing. And so every day we would dismiss a case. Why? The defendant's dead. And we go, why is that? Well, he overdosed. And so over the course of from about 2010 going forward, the administration of the trial court, particularly through the work of Justice Paula Carey, who took over, it was truly a sea change. It was a mission that recognized that the National Association of Drug Courts work that had begun in about 1985 out of Miami. A lone judge in Miami saw the cocaine problems back then and decided to treat it as a medical problem and not only as a criminal problem itself, to have jail be the solution. And so the standards started being applied in Massachusetts, and I was one of the first judges to start the largest drug court in the state in Fall River, which I did about 5 years ago. and I ran it until I came to Falmouth. I live on the Cape, and actually as a judge I didn't want to work on the Cape because you just run into too many people, and it's a little awkward. But I did want to address this. I saw the horrifying HBO special, which triggered my interest in coming to Falmouth. I started Fall River's drug court, and then I began to see and learn. That was the key, I think, for me, was to learn an awful lot about the medical aspects of addiction. And talking to a lot of the people in, it's actually called the intensive treatment unit because there are a variety of, it's mainly opiates, frankly. Now and then, maybe alcohol, but I found that really it was opiates. Over the course of time in Falmouth, we had people, and Falmouth has a substantial heroin problem, always has, oddly enough. It's just been that way. And so we were very full. We had an awful lot of people, and I began to learn things like, you've been clean for 2 years in a jail, you got out. Why did you keep using? I don't understand that. And I would be told to a person, I didn't stop using. I said, well, you did. No, I didn't. In my mind, I had not stopped using yet. And most of these people would get out and within 10 days would be using again and invariably would die. I have been to, 20 wakes, 20 funerals of members of my drug courts that sadly were unable to get recovery. And they would, and then they would unfortunately use. So the drug courts came into being to try to address the fact that not addressing the addiction was not helping public safety because it was the root cause of a lot of these types of crimes, the property crimes, and there are many of them. And so the drug court model came into existence. Now what it is not for everyone who has a drug problem, because some people are able, if they're caught with a crime of some kind, and they admit to the crime, where they're found guilty after trial, of entering into a probationary term and actually doing it. Some people are able to do that. I don't know where they are in their journey, but they are able to do it. That is not for, those people are not for drug court. They can be handled in a less intense way. And in fact, the policy shows and the education I've learned show that if you mix populations, heavy, high need, high risk drug users with low need, low risk, the low need will become high need. They will migrate in that direction. And so drug courts were developed for those individuals in our society, and there are many who are very high risk of reoffending, of dying, of using continuously, and very high need. They need a lot. Many people started in the age, I always ask, as Ms. English-Braga would attest to, anyone who has a drug problem, I'm trying to demystify it in our court system by talking about it to everyone who comes in. So if there's a person who has this, I get right into that with them. And a lot of people started at 15 with the onslaught of OxyContin and the sale of it in the United States. And so at 15, your brain is developing, and it develops, as the literature suggests, until you're about 23 to 25. And so if you introduce heroin into your brain, it takes over on your abilities to navigate the world emotionally. There's a lot of science involved with dopamine levels and all sorts of things that, frankly, I found really fascinating. And I've seen CAT scans of brains on heroin, CAT scans of brains that are thinking about heroin. It's stunning to see a dark hole in the middle of a brain. and then you see it light up when they put a piece of heroin in the person's hand. It's stunning. You see these statistics. So the problem is that once the heroin is introduced, like any chemical, into your brain, it changes the composition of your brain. And as a result of that, it has dynamic effects on your abilities to cope in the world. And it leads itself oftentimes to crime and the behavior that goes along with that. So it becomes, and I think this is a phrase that I railed at to begin with. I didn't rail at it, I sort of railed at it. Disease, is drug addiction a disease? I think people are realizing it is now, but the word itself lends itself to critics who would say, well, it's not cancer, it's not this, or it's not that. I suppose the first month that a person took the drug, you could slap them on the wrist for doing that. But soon thereafter, their brain actually changed. So if you looked at a brain scan and then you said, and you didn't tag a drug to it, let's say you just looked at a brain scan, and you looked at it and you learned some things, you go, oh, that person has a brain disease. Now, no one's saying how it was caused, but just it. You would say, oh, that's a brain disease, okay? And then you go, okay, that started when the person took heroin. It's still a brain disease. It may not, it may have been started with OxyContin either through an injury in high school or, frankly, just pills around. And I think we're seeing that right now on the federal level with indictments and litigation throughout this country, where there were so many pills produced and given. I don't know if anyone here has ever, in the last 5 years, had a tooth pulled, but you could get 30 to 50 oxys, and you really didn't need one. I had a spinal surgery, and I had to sign out against medical advice because I refused to take the script for oxys. And so there has been, you could talk about that till you're blue in the face, how this all developed, but it did. And so what we're facing now is a high percentage of people, particularly in this area, who are committing these types of crimes, who have this brain disorder, and it takes an enormous amount of effort and time for these high-risk, high-need people. If you think about it, most people will not do something that will easily kill them that day, that minute. That does not stop it. It is putting a bullet in a gun and spinning the chamber. And that is really what it's like every time you use now, because the drugs are no longer heroin, it's all fentanyl. It's cheaper to make, easier to produce, can be made anywhere, and comes into our society. And so this is a drug that will kill you, but killing you will not stop you from using it. And when Narcan came along, Narcan is a good and, well, it's a great thing, actually. It is also a bad thing because it's used to come back. But the reality is with fentanyl, you don't necessarily come back on Narcan. With 72,000 deaths last year in our country, could you imagine if Narcan didn't exist? I mean, I think it would be over 1 million people dead. I mean, it's stunning figures. And so the reality for judges are, there became a time when the mission became how to increase public safety, and is jail doing it? And jail wasn't doing it. And so we've entered into these very specific programs that I have a book about the AFEC, and it tells me what to do. I am not a clinician. I certainly learned a lot throughout the years I've been doing it. But it tells me how to run it. It's very step-by-step. There's rewards. There are sanctions. There's encouragement. There's feedback from the caseworkers. I have a team. The chief is here. The chief is having an officer, along with all the other towns, be part of this team. I have a clinician that just got hired a week ago, or I would have started this a lot sooner. But again, I'm not a doctor. And so the people will come into our court. We will screen them. Again, we are looking for the people that cannot stop. without substantial intervention, cannot go through the regular course of probation. They then get screened in, and we start week to week. The first 3 months of the program are dedicated towards honesty. If someone comes into court and they plead guilty to a drug crime, and you say, "Do not use drugs," well, that's just silly. They can't stop, not then. But what they can do is they can walk to court, they can get in court, and if pressed, can be honest. So the first thing, and I would suggest to you the most important thing, is honesty. I cannot tell you how hard it is to get there. Some people it takes a month or two, some people it takes 6 months. I could have blood tests on a person. I could have, in one case, 3 blood tests on a person and say they've been positive, and that person will deny it, deny it, deny it. And when the breakthrough comes and they just admit that part of this, they'd be so used to lying over the years about their addiction, about everything, that it became a way of living. And so first we deal with the basics, honesty, and then we start getting into the medical aspects of using. And then the clinicians, the treatment, and they meet with me every week for the first number of months until we can get through the honesty phase. And then we start meeting them at regular 2-week intervals and see how they're doing. And if they regress, they come back. And if they go forward, we meet every 3 weeks. And then we start setting up treatment plans until the 5th stage, whereas you only come in once a month. But by then, you're still tested 3 times a week. You are still vigorously being reviewed by probation and the caseworkers and clinicians. But the goal is when you leave drug court, you must have a safe place to live, you must have a job, you must be working on family reunification, you must be headed in a very strong direction and have proven it over the course of months. So it's about an 18-month program at the minimum for every person that comes into it. And I will tell you, I thought that was long. I'm wondering lately whether it's enough. It just takes time. And so that is the nature of the program. And I will tell you this, I think the chief would agree, just looking at the numbers of people who come into court in the cases, I would say 70% of the cases that come into Falmouth District Court are drug, opiate related. The arrest is alcohol, domestic violence, and then some outlier type crimes. But the 70% I'd say is related to drugs. And mostly it's property theft cases. Not a high level of violence, although you get that when amongst people who are using. And sometimes in the family members, and also we also have so many what's called Section 35s, which is people coming in to get help for their family member. They can only be held really for about 3 weeks. It's a Band-Aid, but it might keep somebody alive. But we see every day I have 4 of those. And so it really is there, and it's very sad. It's crushingly sad to see this every day with people in their 20s, late teens, and then you see them into their 30s, and they haven't learned to live yet. You have a 25-year-old who started at 15. They're 15. They haven't grown up yet, and part of the process is growing up and shoehorning experience into that time, and it's exceptionally difficult. And all I learned from the first wake I went to, this young fella was coming back from a meeting and ran into somebody, and of course that's somebody with their vigor. If you're using, you really are very vigorous on others using with you. He used once and he died that night, and I went to the wake the next day, and 2 days later, and I thought I was scared to death. I thought I was going to get slapped in the face. But every family I've gone to has been kind, and they are sad. I mean, they couldn't do anything about their child or their brother or their sister. And so I run this program very vigorously in compliance with the medical aspects of it. I do not veer because I've been to too many of those. And every time I think of getting tired or not running things the way they should, I remember those young people. And every day I do. And so I've fallen into this. Actually, I started this just a friend of mine asked me to because no one wanted to do it. A lot of judges, understandably, do not think the judge's role is that. I think it is. I think to have public safety as well as, it's really public safety and family reunification. And the old ways just haven't worked. And so we must be a little bit creative. And I think this isn't based on whims or anything. It's based upon science. And I apply the science and it works. And but for the drug court, if you don't have it, maybe you'll get 8% success. And that's just because they've lived long enough through it. With it, depending upon your success models, it's upwards of 50 to 60%. So the value, it's huge in terms of humanity. But also, humans are not, we are not, no man is an island, as John Donne said, and we all have ripples. And so when they live again, they have children, they have brothers and sisters. And so you're creating communities again. They're now taxpayers. They're now functioning members of society. And frankly, a lot of them are out helping a lot of people because they've been there. And so I think it's a good program. I came into it, I said, just inadvertently, and I told them if this doesn't work and I don't think it's going to work, I'm out because I don't want to waste my time. But I haven't been, and it's been working, and I'm glad finally we were able to get the funding and get organized to start it up, which I think I've put the word out, and I already have a number of people to be lined up to be interviewed on March 16th, and we will be starting on March 23rd every Thursday. So that's kind of my little chat.
Thank you. Thank you, Judge Welk. We
Not a note.
We appreciate the bravery involved in your leadership, and we realize how incredibly needed this program is, and we're very grateful that you're bringing it to Falmouth. And just on behalf of the board, I just want to ask, what can we do as a town to support you?
Well, it's interesting. I mean, I think all these issues, I think the sober houses need desperately to be addressed, but that's a state issue too. I don't know what you can do about that. The difficulty I see in Falmouth is that good people of good faith come here from all around the state to get help at Gosnold, and they do a fine job. But it's the second and third phases of it. They get out, and then they end up somewhere that they will relapse. I mean, it's just going to happen because they need structure, and a lot of it. And although relapse is part of it, not really in a sober house. I mean, if a relapse occurs, there's protocols involved that should be addressed, all sorts of things. But if you do not have a solid group like that, it's hard. And that's why we see continuous crime, because the treatment is ending at a certain point. And it's difficult because you don't apparently need some will be certified, but a lot don't have to be. So I think that's probably a statewide thing that needs to get looked at, much like in the old days, child daycare didn't used to get regulated, and then that didn't go so well. And so now they do. And so I think that needs to take place, but that's beyond my pay grade.
It is gratifying.
I think welcoming it is
exactly.
important.
This board is moving in that direction to bring some more information to the folks of Falmouth. And I also want to bring up the Chief of Police and Susie Hoffman, who's the Human Services Department Director, just to give you a couple of minutes on Falmouth and to welcome
That'd
you.
be great. I think just the fact that I'm standing here, that this exists, and that people are recognizing it as something that is a good thing, that's good. Because it's just saying, don't be afraid of this thing. We can do something about it. It is not easy. But if we try our hardest, If you think without it we'll save one person, we could save 6. So there you go. And it's demystifying it. It's making, this is a disease. It's not you're a you're a bad person. We can help you with this and stop your crime from occurring. 5 to 10, well, you get caught X amount of times, but that doesn't mean you're not doing the crime Y amount of times. And so if you extrapolate that out, that's a lot of crime that won't be happening. And that's critical. And I think you'd see it. I think you'd see it in the town. I think the chief would see it. So I'm hoping to be able to do that. But anyway, I'll let them speak.
Thank you very
Thank
much.
you very
Welcome.
much.
Thank you.
Evening.
Evening, Chief.
This is going to be a great program. It's going to be great for Falmouth. It really is, and it's just another tool that the police department will, as the judge said, it's going to help us greatly with crime and with the programs that we have in place now. It's just one more tool that we can use. I was familiar with when Judge Welch came to Falmouth, and I was familiar with his drug court in Fall River from speaking with police departments over there, and the success that it had. And that was probably one of the first conversations I had with him when he got here, and I met him, was whether or not we were going to have one here, and he said yes, but of course he had to start slowly, and everything else costs money. I have committed to have police officers participate in this program, as I believe the other chiefs on the Upper Cape have also, because it is important, and it's going to assist us. It's going to help save lives. This year alone, we're up about 109% in overdoses and 400% in deaths from last year already. So it's growing, even though we have all these programs that we're doing. The police department is committed. We're still working with Gosnell, doing the home visits. Our officers are responding to the overdoses, administering Narcan, bringing people back. We have pamphlets that we give them, as well as letting them know that they're going to get a visit from a coach and a police officer. But this is one more piece that is needed. It's probably like the missing link, I'm hoping, that will help bring these people back. It gives them, as the judge says, it gives them will to live. Gets them back in their families, because a lot of times their families, as I've said to the board before, a lot of times their families have disowned them, only because they're tired, they can't deal with it anymore. So this is one more piece that will bring back. So really looking forward to it, and I really hope it's embraced by the community.
Thank you very much. Susie, welcome.
Thank you. I too can't say enough about this coming to the community. I think this is going to be a real game changer. I think it introduces a level of compassion and humanity to the issue of substance use disorder and recognizing it as a disease. And the research really tells us that a multi-pronged effort towards the treatment of addiction, from harm reduction to prevention to treatment to recovery support services, is really important. And I think that our community is doing a lot to hit each one of those approaches. Our department is certainly committed to supporting the effort. We have staffed clinical social workers. One of them in particularly goes to the re-entry meetings at Barnstable County Jail to help with Falmouth residents who are returning to the community. So we look forward to working with your clinician and your team to make sure that the Falmouth residents that are involved in the drug court have our support and can connect to the other resources that are available in the community. So this is a really great thing for the community.
Thank you very much. Appreciate your support and statements from someone who knows. Thank you very much. Any questions, members of the board?
No, I'm just excited that it's coming, and we got to do everything we can to get ahead of this.
Megan?
Not a question, but I would just say that I hope folks, I always say to my clients, and I think there's probably about, I don't know, it's probably about, I think 15 of them, between 12 and 15 in the last 10 years that have overdosed. And, some of them, I remember one individual showing me a 60-day chip as I drove through Starbucks, and he overdosed 2 days later. So these are people who are really trying, but we're asking them to do superhuman things. I mean, we're literally asking them to fight their biology and their entire, what their brain, what every cell in their body is asking them to do. So, the idea that we need to have just like any other disease, when you do have cancer, you have an oncologist, you have someone who's working on nutrition. You look at the body as a, whole mechanism, and you're trying to treat that whole body. And, the goal here is to support that. And I think for folks who, as the judge was noting, sort of think of it as a soft, some kind of soft measure, it's the opposite. It really is trying to make long-term impacts, not only, even if for some reason people don't have compassion for these individuals or all the people who they touch, it is a crime reduction measure. So, whatever angle people want to come at, if they're not there yet to feel really compassionate about somebody going through this, to think about the impact it has on our, our first responders who are literally every day, their sort of new task is reviving people who have passed away. That's not what most police officers and firefighters signed up to do, primarily as their work. It's not the same job that people, signed up for 10, 20 years ago. So there are so many benefits to this that people, who we've had this big debate in town about sort of addiction as, a disease, or even if you're not there yet, there's so many other public benefits, and sort of, just the bottom line, the numbers in terms of the resources we put, from this town towards issues that pertain to this, and the property crimes, the spill out to family, the spill out to children in our school systems who need those supports. Those are all reasons why this is just incredibly valuable, even beyond sort of that individual being able to have, to live again and not be in that. I don't think anyone who's ever seen someone detox thinks that they really want to continue to live that way. So I think it's just wonderful. This is finally happening, and I think that the judge misspoke and he said March, but I think he meant May. I meant May. It's not a whole nother year away. It's actually really, really just around the corner. But I would welcome anybody. It's not my court, but I'm up here, so I'll welcome them on behalf of the judge because it's a public gallery. Come in if you don't understand what goes on in court. Come in and sit there for the morning and listen to the people that come up and listen to sort of, you'll see for yourself that it is that 70%, that vast majority are folks struggling with this issue. And you can, hear their stories and really just put a face on it if it's not something you're familiar with. Court is open to anyone. And so, I hope people really educate themselves if they're interested in it. So thank you for sharing that with us tonight.
All good points. Thank you, everyone. We're going to move to the next part of our presentation, which will be a joint meeting on affordable housing. And I want to invite members of the Affordable Housing Committee to come up and sort of sit with us. We've set up some extra chairs. Not all at once, of course.
Anyone?
Thank you. There you go.
Thank you.
Thanks, John.
The Board of Selectmen wanted to put this joint meeting together
It's a couple for you.
kind of out of frustration, having worked very, very hard on housing issues for years, and, kind of wanted to get some direct feedback from folks who are actually working on various parts of the effort to see what is working vis-a-vis the interactions with the town in producing affordable housing, what isn't, maybe particular experiences or ideas that folks have had. The particular areas we're looking at is really continuing to build an affordable housing production process that's right for Falmouth. We're sensitive to the fact that we don't want cookie cutter solutions. We want feedback from the community on building in the community, looking at challenges, collaboration, and improvements moving forward. So please feel free to just, that was Peter. That was a false start, sorry about that. He's always ahead of me. But so if you do have a comment, if you could just raise your hand, maybe keep it to a couple of minutes, because I'm hoping everyone will want to weigh in here. And thank you all for attending. We really appreciate all the work that you do every week in your free time, and how committed you are to the solution. So
Pardon me,
thank you
Madam
for that.
Chair.
Please.
Did you want to have, I believe, we have a quorum of the CPC and possibly the Affordable Housing Committee. Did you want them to convene their
That I sure
respective,
do. Thank you.
committees?
Chairs?
Whoever the chairs.
Call the meeting of the Falmouth Community Preservation Committee to order.
Thank you. And Chair of Affordable Housing?
I don't know if Ed's here.
Ed? Vice Chair? Do we have a Vice Chair?
I'm the vice chair.
Please?
We don't have a quorum.
No quorum? Okay. And who else was?
Those were the two
Two, okay.
committees officially.
Well, thank you for
Joining you.
coming. Well, we did notice it just in case there were quorums, so appreciate that. In which case, Peter, thank you.
For real
You're
this
on.
time, Peter.
Yep.
Sure. We thought we would kick off the conversation. I understand that the purpose of this meeting is primarily a dialogue, but what we thought might be helpful, we did just undertake a pretty substantial, comprehensive study and a resulting report in the Housing Production Plan. I've pulled out just a couple of highlights from that. I have some copies if you want to hand those around. It's probably not going to be quite enough for the entire audience, so I just pulled a couple of the slides that I think might provide good context for conversation, and then if it is agreeable with you, Chairman Moran, Carla Ferroni has just a quick overview of what has recently transpired with the Falmouth Affordable Housing Fund, and Town Planner Tom Bott is available to speak to some of the process and permitting issues that he's been observing and seeks to improve.
I think that'll be helpful foundational information to get everyone up to speed on where we are currently, so thanks for that.
Sure. So these slides are not mine. They are from the presentation that was presented by the consultant Karen Sonneborg, who prepared the housing production plan. I'm not going to go through them in detail, but just want to highlight a couple of things. The report, as many of you probably are aware, is begins with an analysis of the data, the community's demographics, the actual housing that we've had, the housing that's recently been produced, and then comes up with a series of recommendations. That report identifies the top priority as rental housing. It suggests that 85% of the new housing that we produce ought to be rental housing. A couple of reasons cited for that. First of all, the existing housing stock is overwhelmingly home ownership, and those units tend to be more expensive to produce and more expensive to maintain. That leaves, of course, 15% of the units to be produced as homeownership units, and there are a couple of suggestions in the report about how that might be done: infill housing, providing opportunities for first-time home buyers and empty nesters. Another priority identified in the report is to produce housing that is accessible to people with disabilities and special needs, and it is suggested that our goal be to have 20% of all units created for seniors or single individuals be units that are accessible to people with disabilities, and 10% of all family housing be accessible to people with disabilities. The report identifies a number of challenges to producing affordable housing, ranging from infrastructure, zoning, environmental concerns, property costs, availability of subsidy funds, community concerns, and public transportation. The report has some capacity building strategies included. One of them is outreach and education, such as what we're doing here today, providing more support for the Falmouth Affordable Housing Fund. I apologize for the acronyms on the slide. Formalizing monitoring of the subsidized housing inventory units. That refers to when a deed-restricted affordable unit is sold, that we have a process in place to monitor that and make sure that it is retained as affordable housing so that it's sold to someone who meets the income requirements. Conducting additional research and planning. Zoning and regulatory strategies. Again, I'm not the expert on zoning strategies. These are some of the highlights that are pulled out, one of which is the accessory apartments or accessory dwelling units, which we have certainly spent quite a bit of time and energy on recently. Also encouraging multifamily and mixed-use development, allowing more diverse housing types. What the market tends to produce is single-family, three-bedroom units, and we want to try to make an effort to produce single-family or single-individual, one-bedroom, two-bedroom units are, particularly not being produced by the private market, and that's something that we want to emphasize. Some other suggestions included here are inclusionary zoning. As some of you may know, that refers to beyond when a developer might choose a 40B pathway. Inclusionary zoning is a requirement that some, particularly cities, have adopted that says any multi-housing development has to have a certain percentage be affordable. For example, in the city of Boston, it's 10%. And lastly, to explore tax relief for year-round rentals, such as Provincetown and Wellfleet have done. Production strategies, housing production strategies from the report: make suitable public property available for affordable housing, promote partnerships with developers, encourage special need housing, explore regional partnerships, and that's it. Again, I think if we want to try to quickly get some information on the table and then open it up for discussion, our housing coordinator, Carla Ferroni, will say a few words about the housing fund.
Come on up, Carl. Thank you. Appreciate that overview, Peter. Hi.
Thank you. Carla Ferroni. Thank you for showing up. I see so many of you in the audience that I consider my partners in helping to develop affordable housing. So thank you for being here and participating. So I have 8 or 9 slides. I'm going to talk about the history briefly of the Falmouth Affordable Housing Fund, and then go into some of the accomplishments that have taken place since the town hired me in November of 2017. So this slide talks about the history of the fund. The fund was initiated in 2011. The Selectmen went to the General Court to create the fund. It's a special law, and it is unique to Falmouth. The purpose is to promote, expand, and retain affordable housing in the town. And our primary revenue source is Community Preservation Act funds. The revenue stream from 2011 to 2017 was almost $3 million. With that amount of money, 63 affordable housing units were built, and the housing demand study was completed in 2013. And then in November 2016, town meeting voted to appropriate $300,000 from the Community Preservation Fund to hire a housing coordinator position for 3 years. And in November 2017, I was hired. It's a brand new position. So the first several months that I was here on board, I spent that time getting to know a lot of you in this room and listening to you share with me your thoughts about affordable housing and what has worked well here and where there could be room for improvement. And I really appreciate you all taking that time to talk with me and sharing your ideas. So what I started doing after those listening sessions was to go in and really change around the fund. So pretty much all of it now has been changed. And I started out by creating a new letter of intent and a new application. And what I was hearing from developers and my housing partners is that, we really needed to have a process that was transparent, that was repeatable, and so developers knew exactly what to expect when they applied for these funds, how long it would take. So in addition to that application, I worked with the working group to develop a new review process, funding allocation guideline. Many of you know that allocation guideline is up to $65,000 per unit. We have new funding priorities. We worked with the Affordable Housing Committee and others to create funding priorities that we look at when we're going to fund a project. And we really established the working group. The working group for the fund was a little loosely put together in the past, and that has been reinvigorated, and I want to thank the working group. Some members are here tonight for participating and helping us to guide the redevelopment of this fund. And I built the Falmouth Affordable Housing Fund website. So now people can go to that website and see what we have done and all of the documents that have been created if they want to apply for funding. When I started on board, we had a balance of $1.3 million in the fund, and that has now been spent down to about $20,000. We revised the fund's distribution process, and that is a work in process now. Previously, we had looked at only using grants, and now we're looking at loans for projects that are funded above a certain level. And that's taking some time for us to pull together, but that is moving forward. We became a participant with Mass Docs. Now, Mass Docs is new to the town. It is collaborative at the state level where various funding sources for any one project get together, and the attorneys get together, and there's an attorney assigned for the town of Falmouth, and they do the due diligence required to close on these subsidy loans. There are some projects that have upwards of 10 or 12 subsidizing agents for their projects. So Mass Docs has been a fabulous time saver for us and has reduced a lot of our administrative and legal time involved. We also updated the housing production plan, and as Peter just was explaining to us, that plan and the plan targeting priorities based on the needs and the data that supported those needs. Just recently, this past month, we amended the housing production plan scope to include the collection of data on the affordable units in town. You know, it's been brought up that we have trouble, like not unlike other municipalities, we have trouble monitoring these units. The monitoring of the units is an unfunded mandate, so there has been no money to do it, and that's been problematic. So our first step is to use some unexpended funds in the update of the housing production plan to gather all that data on each individual unit and have it housed in one central location. Also, we in the past had lost some affordable single-family houses at the point of resale. And at the point of resale, there's a lengthy progress that you go through whereby the owner notifies the town, and the town has a certain number of days to react, to exercise a right of first refusal, to find an eligible buyer. And since the town hired me and has somebody now to be looking after those units, we've been able to maintain those units that have gone through resale. Last year, we had a large appropriation from CPA funds, $770,000, and we appreciated that. We've received 6 applications for funding since I've been on board here. We've processed those 6. We have, the Board of Selectmen voted to allocate $2.3 million. With that money, we've created 61 affordable units at a cost of a little over $38,000 per unit, which is a great investment for $38,000 to get an affordable unit. So then we get to short-term goals. So there's still a lot of work to be done. one thing that's pretty important, I think, right now is to seek additional revenue sources. As I mentioned, CPA is our primary revenue source. And, you know, there's a finite amount of money that they have, and to accomplish the development of affordable units in town, it's going to take more money than CPC has in any given year. I'd like to establish application funding rounds. Right now, applications are received on a first-come, first-served basis. And that's very difficult to plan on an operating budget when you have just a rolling application process. If we have funding rounds, then we know what's coming in. We can look at more than one application at a time and look at evaluating those applications comparatively. And I think that'll be helpful for us. And fine-tune the application review process. I think that the application review process has been working really well, and I think we have met our timelines. In some cases, we've expedited our processing based on the needs of developers that have come to us. And, but we want to fine-tune that. And lastly, continue to strengthen relationships with developers in the community. And you folks are the backbone of creating affordable housing, and you help me do my job every day, and I just want to thank you for all you've done to help this fund continue to be successful. Thank you.
Great presentation. Any questions for Carla from the board? Great.
Madam Chair, we have some comments from Tom Bott, if you may.
Yes, please. Thank you, Carla. Welcome, Tom.
Madam Chairman, members of the board, I'm Tom Bott, I'm the town planner here in Falmouth, Mass. The town of Falmouth recognizes the importance of housing. It's reflected in the adoption of the local comprehensive plan and the housing production plan. The majority of the affordable housing units created in Massachusetts are under Massachusetts General 40B. This is a law that was created in 1969 due to a crisis in affordable housing. Fast forward 50 years and that crisis remains unabated. The realities of affordable housing are that there isn't nearly enough anywhere. As such, when a 40B comes to town, the town should be working to create the best development possible, knowing that the developers don't have to comply with the local zoning. And at the end of the day, any appeal goes to the Housing Appeals Committee in Boston. Developers often design a project with more units than they expect to have approved because they expect from experience that the number will be reduced in negotiations with the ZBA. 40Bs tend to happen in a hot development market when all departments are very busy reviewing various building projects, since the prices of the market rate units are what underwrite the affordable units. In a down market, we see much less of that activity. And the local ZBA has one of the toughest jobs where this development review is being conducted in an environment where the abutters aren't necessarily pleased with the prospects or the project as proposed. The expectations of the developer after meeting with staff and development and departments and designing their projects should be based on the input in that number of units. And if we have that sort of input, the developer should have an expectation that their project is sort of going along that path. As I said, right now money is cheap, demand is high, and there are ominous signs on the horizon such as the inverted yield curve that are forecasting a likely downturn. So people are very busy trying to get things done. What is considered a friendly 40B, meaning that the development is supported by the town through the LIP process. Now the LIP process happens prior to the 40B, the LIP being the local initiative process. And this is a process that occurs where the developer is applying to one of these subsidized agencies and ask for permit before they ask for permission for their comprehensive permit. It's not a required step for a 40B, and not necessarily, a 40B isn't necessarily a LIP. The LIP process designation should provide support and direction to the Planning Zoning Board of Appeals in approving a project designated as a LIP through the Board of Selectmen's office. LIP development should only be supported where that proposed development is consistent with the goals of the Housing Production Plan, the local comprehensive plan, and the Cape Cod's regional policy plan. There's a clear that there should be a benefit to the town in supporting that 40B as opposed to those plans or those projects that may not comport with the town's goals. In an instance where organizations like Falmouth Housing Corp. Or Habitat for Humanity, which are creating 100% of their units as affordable and have been endorsed by the Selectmen, there should be relative certainty that the number of units proposed are the number of units approved. Developers, as I said, all too often come to the table with more units than they anticipate having approved, and this creates quite a bit of consternation when it arrives and people look at and see all these things they're trying to put on this piece of property. There are other avenues where we can create affordable housing as well. We saw some of them in the HPP. The inclusionary housing bylaw, where whatever the development is, a certain number, if you get to 6, 10, whatever that is, a certain percentage of those, usually 10%, are affordable. That helps to keep us treading water so we don't lose ground when we create new units. There's also Massachusetts Chapter 40R. 40R, created by the legislature, is the carrot for affordable housing, as opposed to 40B, which is the stick. The town opts in to 40R. And it's mentioned working with local nonprofits, regional nonprofits, and national nonprofits in creating those affordable units that are consistent with the plans that we put together. We talked about the need for a multitude of units, of rental units and things like that. And the default, as Peter pointed out, is largely 3-bedroom, single-family detached. Under a non-LIP 40B, these are projects that just show up sort of unannounced. We don't quite know they're coming. They have to come through a subsidizing agency, Mass Housing or DHCD. And in those cases, the turnaround is very tight. 30 days for comments for this, 30 days for comment for that. It requires an organization like ours to be nimble, which is not something we are known for. So when we look at that, you can't quite have a full-on structure committee to meet and have these conversations about things. We have to sort of have a more streamlined process that we have been developing. In the past year, I've had discussions about 4 different developers about various projects for 40Bs, some which may come to fruition, some which may never. We always encourage them, looking at the LIP, looking at the housing production plan, what are those things that we're looking for, encourage them to take their project and steer their project in that direction to create those things so we can support them, because if these projects are coming forward, these developers are coming forward, and they meet the goals that we've identified, the goals that have been voted by the Planning Board and by the Board of Selectmen through the Housing Production Plan and approved by DHCD, those are the type of plans that we should be supporting. As I mentioned before, the ZBA has the toughest job in this process. And the developments that we see shouldn't be about what, but they should be about, should be about what and not about who. But who also has a role in this. If you have a developer who has a proven track record and has done good projects, it's still about what, but that who is important to know that you're working with someone who has a good track record on those things. Under the 40B process, that starts under the auspices of the Board of Selectmen. We get a letter, a site approval letter, or project improvement letter. And that first step is required by the town to reply in 30 days. So we've got to have that quick turnaround, as we talked about. In 2007, the town created a local initiative program application process and included a committee. This is some of the archaeology I've been doing over the year that I've been here trying to find those things that we had created previously and maybe were just sort of slumbering somewhere. So that had a process with a committee, and some iteration of that committee could be created or expanded to support those sort of LIP projects and reviewing them prior to. Affordable housing, as I said, comes in waves, and we're seeing a big wave right now because the market is hot. The role of the planning office and the planning board, as noted in plans and documents, consistently won't change much. We will be continuing to vet those things through the planning office, and as it turns out, through the role the planning board has played historically. Boards and committees' priorities are typically controlled by those things that have a constructive deadline. If you don't approve these in a certain amount of time, then things go away, get out of your hands. You don't have that local control. And this is one of the things that's very frustrating to me in trying to work with larger policy issues. And I can tell you that we try to meet as often as we can and as frequently as we can with developers. But I can tell you that Karen Bissonette personally has been very patient and simultaneously exasperated with me in getting an opportunity to sit down and look at a project together. And a lot of times the projects that come to these nonprofits are projects that people couldn't develop. There are benevolent people out there who give away perfectly good land. But there are an awful lot of people who give away land and say, I really can't use this because I can't develop it, so let me give it to Habitat or somebody else. I'll get a gift, a tax write-off or something like that. So oftentimes when we're working with these folks, we have somewhat of marginal properties that we're dealing with. So as of the process that are in place, 2006 we had considerable activity and we created this local advisory committee. In 2013 there was discussion about new steps for the LIT process. It included monitoring, as we heard earlier, one of the toughest things to deal with on an ongoing basis for monitoring, marketing affordable units, and the ability of town to continue as an active LIP partner. Because we have a responsibility when we enter into this LIP, this local initiative process. Prior to the adoption of the housing production plan, we, staff, realized that there was a need to take those broad policy goals, the HPP, and operationalize them and to determine how to make those goals fit into the designs of the project. That is something to still on my list of things to do, and I need to get busy on that. For the developments that don't have much contact with the town prior to filing, there simply isn't enough time to put together a committee to vet those applications and review them. Even in the case of our latest application, it arrived 8 days before it was supposed to, 8 days before we got the official deadline from Mass Housing to make our 30-day comments. The timing was great because it was prior to our regular monthly staff meeting where we sit down and talk about developments. It is prior to the planning board and the selectmen meeting, but even with that, even if we tried to have the selectmen or the planning board talk about it at their next meeting on May 14th, the deadline's due May 16th with Mass Housing. They typically will give you some flexibility on those deadlines because they realize that this is a difficult process and it's hard to roll all those things in. So some of those best practices are creating this sort of ad hoc committee of department heads and board chairs. But you don't have time to sort of have a regular set meeting on that. When these things come in, you sort of have to focus on that right away. The most recent application, we came in, Noreen and I emailed about it, we talked about it, went out to the site that day. The next day we issued the plans out to departments and things like that. It was a week before our regular development review meeting, and even with all that, we still won't be in front of a board, whether it's the planning board or the board of selectmen, until pushing on that 30-day deadline. So we acknowledge there are a lot of things that have to be done, there are a lot of things that need to be done, and it's a matter of just carving out that time and trying to get those things done and producing processes that really streamline something as best they can, but it is very difficult, it's a very complex project. The only thing that's harder than approving an affordable housing is that person who wants to buy one, who has to go through that process of qualifying based on income, but still being able to qualify for a mortgage, going through the lottery process. So that's a very hard thing for those folks, and I'm cognizant of it all the time, and frankly wish I had more of an opportunity to focus on these up front. And we're working on that, and we're moving forward with that. And the beat goes on, and the battle goes on.
Well, I think you've really touched on some of the issues, which are very pragmatic in terms of, there's and I'm kind of throwing this out here for comment, so if please raise your hand if you want to, want to introduce an idea. But, when you look at rolling applications, for example, I know recently I got a quick call on a weekend, there's a developer that needs something, this is the deadline, can we squeeze this in, what are the precursors? And we can do that. So there, I think that whatever policies we have, we might want to look at whether, if there is a need to expedite, whether that can be worked in or whether it should just be a rolling application process. What's the upside? What's the downside for that? But I think the overall, point that you made, which I know I appreciate, I'm sure some of the folks in the room do, are that, we needed to communicate what the dependable process is so that we can, sort of hand developers, this is what you do for the application, this is where you get it, this is the deadline, that's the next step. And so that anticipates some time deadlines, and it sounds like that's exactly what you're working on.
And important for those folks who do take our advice. One example of a development that the developers that came in thinking about apartments was decided to switch back to single-family residences, owner-occupied units. About the time the HPP, the Housing Production Plan, came out, and I reached out to them and said, actually, your apartments meet very well with our Housing Production Plan. So those are one of those examples of trying to steer a developer in that direction to comply with what our goals and policies are. But you want to get to them early, because when someone invests a lot of money in making a set of plans and this is the path they're on, it's very difficult to convince them that they should consider the merits of trying something else. So it's about communication and collaboration, and trying to get to folks early on in the process. But the ones that drop like in our laps, we're just under the gun for those, and we've got to get them turned around, and we're doing the very best that we can to get those turned around. So
Thank you. Karen, you want to share your thoughts on this?
Madam Chair, while Karen's coming to the
Yep.
microphone, could I just acknowledge the other staff members that are in attendance, if I may?
And I see some chair, ZBA chair.
Yeah.
Yeah, please do.
In addition to the staff members have spoken, we have Jen McKay, our Conservation Administrator, our Building Commissioner, Rod Palmer, our Health Agent, Scott McGann, and of course, our Zoning Administrator, Noreen Stockman, in addition to the several members of boards and commissions. Carol Sutherland is with us also from CPC, and I appreciate all of them in attendance to listen and comment. Also, our past Assistant Town Manager, Heather Harper, who's now working steadfastly on housing with the Cape Cod Commission. Thank you.
And welcome.
And she's also on the Board of Falmouth Housing Trust as well, so I'll have to get that.
Nice.
Thank you. Karen?
Thank you. Hi, Karen Bissonette, Executive Director of Falmouth Housing Trust. Thank you for this forum this evening, and I know that all of us who are involved in creating affordable housing are appreciative, because we all know there is a crisis. What I think we're doing is we're, not that we're not doing that already, but we need help from everyone in this room and others to be able to try to solve that problem. And it's not going to be solved quickly. And I do want to comment that working with Carla has really been wonderful, and she's been a great addition. She came on soon after I did, and I appreciate her hard work and her sense of humor, which it takes. And so I appreciate that, and I know that the Affordable Housing Committee does as well. I just want to make a couple comments in that I know that the CPC committee members that are here tonight have seen how much money really we do need for housing. And I would like all of you and everyone in this room and the whole community actually to realize that that's never going to be enough money. The town is going to have to kick in money other than CPA money, or we're never even going to touch this. So that is something that we'll probably be talking about at other town meetings. I'm sure we'll be talking about it in this room more. But we've, $3 million we've gotten. It's going to take 2, 3, 4 times that amount of money to touch this problem. So put that in your back of your head or in the front of your head, but that is going to be something that we're really going to need to tackle with other issues, of course, we have in town. I would just ask, especially as a nonprofit developer, that things just get tightened up just a bit. It is frustrating sometimes when you're asked for something in triplicate weeks apart from one another. So I know that we don't have the streamlined process we want yet. I know that people are working towards that, and I do appreciate everyone's help, because I know that sometimes we all get a little overwhelmed, and this is an overwhelming process when you have to deal with not only the town but the state, and I do believe that everyone is trying to work towards the same end. So I appreciate that.
What does that mean? Is it something where you use DocuSign or a computer program that folks have access to, so you don't have to keep copying this much paper? Or
No.
What does that look like?
At this point, no, it's just, in this last go-around for us, I felt like I was turning things in, I was asked for the same things multiple times. So the last set of documents I turned in was 112 pages. And that was not the first time I had given it. So, you know, I just think that there just needs to be a little bit more of a streamlined process, and maybe we could create that in some way. So that would be very helpful. Also, Falmouth Housing Trust has the good fortune that we have a good relationship with a local bank in town. So we were able to borrow the money for the house we recently closed on, the affordable home. And we've yet to receive the money from the town for that. And that's been 7 months last week that the selectmen voted on that. And I think that's just a little bit too much time, because if we didn't have access to that money, the project wouldn't have gone forward. And I think that other organizations might not have, you know, those resources maybe to borrow. Ours was not a huge amount of money that we had to borrow compared to some of the projects that Linda's doing or that Alicia's doing. So I just think that we need to tighten that timeline up just a tad. So I appreciate everything everyone said here, but we just need to just move forward. And if there's something that on this side that developers can do, you know, if there's a certain process you need us to do, obviously we want to make things as quick as possible, and we want to get moving as quickly as possible, because as we know, building costs just keep going up. There's less and less land available. So the faster we can move on things, the better it is for everyone. And I thank you for the opportunity, and I thank everyone here. Thanks.
Thank you. Anyone else on that particular issue? I think probably everyone on the board is curious about the concept of funding rounds. And, you know, it was posed to us a while ago that would work administratively for the town, but I think there was some concern among board members as to whether that would close out certain projects, and I just didn't know if anyone here had a view on that.
I think Karen had a view that we're gonna need other funding.
Right? But if there are no problems with funding rounds, I guess that's a message to the board that funding rounds would be a good thing, since we've heard staff say it would be helpful.
Madam Chair?
Please.
So when we discussed this the last time, the board clearly expressed a concern, and I think from some of the developers in the room also were concerned that the purpose of the fund was to have a quick turnaround, and so a once-a-year funding round might not be consistent with the objective of the fund. So we heard that, and we, whatever process that we agree to, we want to continue to strive to, you know, to meet the town's goals and to be as responsive as we can. The current moment in time is perhaps a good illustration of where a funding round might be appropriate. We have a balance of $20,000 in the fund. So if we don't have a funding round, we get an application now, and if the application sort of meets all of our requirements, and you know, we're going to be inclined to give it, you know, perhaps some sort of conditional approval. Whereas if it might make sense, given that there isn't a great rush and we don't have any funds to disperse right now, it might be helpful to say, okay, let's have a funding round closer to when we anticipate having funds, and that way, if we have multiple applications, instead of just looking at the first one and saying this looks good, we can look at multiple together and say, you know, do we want to fund them all? Do we want to prioritize one over another? So that's where, and it doesn't have to be a sort of one-size-fits-all. The rounds can be driven by the availability of funds. But that was sort of the thoughts that we wanted to consider in terms of a funding round.
Appreciate that. Doug?
So what are our options for other ways to fund the Affordable Housing Fund other than just CPC? Like, for instance, Martha's Vineyard Commission voted to put a surcharge on rebuild of, you know, large houses and new construction. I don't know if it's 1% across the board on those large projects. Is that something we would consider? Is that something maybe the Cape Cod Commission would impose, or is that a local initiative? Curious if
one of the things
has.
I could comment on, the board may recall, we recently had a discussion about a funding mechanism that the legislature's already enabled and that is to place a surcharge that would be limited strictly to either infrastructure or affordable housing as part of the lodging tax. So that could be considered by this board and a future town meeting, should you wish to do that, and the purposes would be exclusive in that case.
And just before, just on the subject matter, Pamela Harding Barrett couldn't come tonight. She's really quite ill, but she wanted to make sure that she left me a message to just bring up something. I believe that she spoke to the town manager. I noticed some other folks out, here that are in the audience tonight, but just in general about an idea that I think that they did, in her previous community, where there was sort of a voluntary, ability to kind of give a voluntary contribution when you sent in your, whatever it might be, your excise tax or your water bill to the town. And it was just another way that the town actually, that she came from, did raise some funds, and they were all earmarked for affordable housing. So I just wanted to sort of on her behalf share that, because I know she wanted to be here tonight but couldn't be. So
Exactly. Welcome. Please.
Hi.
You have an answer to our question, I'm sure.
Hi, Elisa Galazzi, CEO of Housing Assistance Corporation.
Welcome.
Thank you. I didn't know what the format was, so I was sitting there trying to figure out, should I just approach? A couple things that when I heard about the funding rounds potentially going to be an annual deadline, I wanted to strongly advocate to keep it rolling. It's very hard to fund a project, and sometimes you get a piece of land and you get your bids, and you've got to make commitments to other funders and other organizations quickly. And if you had to wait a year in order to get the commitment for a couple $100,000 or whatever it may be, it may be something that actually prohibits the project from going forward. So there are ways to put restrictions, or have it be last in, or have it be capitalized in another way that can give you the assurity that the project's going to go through, but help the developer bring the project forward. The other thing that I wanted to talk about a minute is you're talking about money and how to fund construction, right, and development, is this notion of the short-term rental tax. And I don't know if you've heard of Future Cape Cod Coalition, but my agency with the Realtors Association of Cape Cod, the Cape Cod Chamber, and Association to Preserve Cape Cod have come together to advocate to towns, to selectmen, and to towns to actually portion a part of that new revenue coming in for infrastructure investments. And you have a significant potential in revenue here, right? You have a lot of seasonal rentals that is going to add quite a bit of revenue potentially to your bottom line. And so figuring out a way to carve that out and to either add it to one of your trusts or to another way to fund some of the projects that you have would be advantageous to organizations like mine and other developers that are trying to add inventory in the region. The last thing is another program that we started is called Rent 365, and I saw in one of your ideas this notion of a tax abatement if someone rents out their house year-round. And I believe I read that 7,000 or so seasonal units that you have, if you could convert any of them to a year-round rental, it's going to be faster and less expensive than trying to find the land and build the infrastructure and build the unit. So in the region, our goal was to convert 25 homes. It's a pilot program that my colleague David Quinn is running for us. Our goal was to convert 25 homes. We've converted 17 so far in the past 4 months, and it's throughout the region. And there's a lot of reasons why people want to do it. You guys have I think the 4th highest average income on Cape Cod. I think it was around $100,000. That's about 33% of that. The affordability measure for housing is about $2,700 a month. You have a significant population that can afford $2,500 a month in rent, and so that's not every house, right? I mean, it has to be worth the $2,500, but some of the nicer properties that are being rented at a seasonal to seasonal families and to seasonal visitors may be able to convert over to some of the professionals that are working at the hospital or working at Hui. And so we just put that out there as another way to add inventory quickly and at a far cheaper price
than building. And we offered a financial incentive to landlords. So we're paying people $1,000 to convert, which I know doesn't sound like a lot of money, but when we walk them through the financial benefits of renting year-round versus renting seasonally, it actually, and for a lot of people, depending on carrying costs and such, makes a lot of sense. And there's some, tax implications and tax benefits for someone who rents year-round as well. That's advantageous. So that's another thing that we're advocating for in the region is to think about housing and the stock that we have differently, and try to get the homeowners to become a landlord, and try to make it easy for them to do that.
Let me ask you a quick question, because that's a real novel thought that obviously I'm familiar with. What about a similar idea for seasonal workers? I mean, we have, our economy is largely driven, to the benefit of many folks in town, business owners, by seasonal workers, and our businesses have a very difficult time finding housing. Just wondered your thoughts on solutions.
Solutions. Wow. Okay, hold up. We're going to brainstorm while I'm up here. We're not so focused on the short-term market because we're trying to protect and preserve the ray of life on Cape Cod, and trying to help Cape Codders, year-rounders, stay housed here. But similar tactics could be applied. It's, again, looking at the inventory a little bit differently. So could you offer a subsidy? Could you help in another way? If attracting a workforce, a seasonal workforce, is important to the town because of tax base and visitors, right, which I would assume it is, then yeah, is there a way that you can subsidize that property for that homeowner and make it worth their while? There are a lot of costs, there are a lot of expenses in doing that. And when we think of it as an asset and something that a person is using for the benefit of the region, there should be some incentive for them.
Thank you. Appreciate that. Other questions?
Well, those are some interesting ideas. Thank you.
Thanks for coming up. Is anyone here have a particular, burning question or suggestion? Mark.
Mark Finneran, Precinct 6. As many of you know, I just sponsored and passed an article for accessory dwelling units in the sewer service areas in town, which was voted by the planning board for, indefinite postponement, which I never really understood. But we're sitting here trying to fix a problem as government that has been partially created by government. Just get down to the basic ingredients. What's needed most for affordable housing? And first, affordable land. Yet, we choose to buy up all the cheap, affordable land for open space when this town has better than 50% open space as it is. Anyone who doesn't believe it, there's a state website, and the last time I checked, it went up from 46 to 54% open space. And it's much easier, just look at a photograph, an aerial photograph of this town in the summer. It's nothing but green. We really need to stop buying up all the land that's out there that would naturally be bought by developers to develop cheap housing. And again, with the plan here to have 85% rental units, and some in large buildings like the thing we're going to do in Little Pond, it seems like we haven't learned the lesson of Cabrini Green, and we should learn the lesson of Levittown. Let the industry do what it's best at, sometimes government is just too unwieldy. And I know I'm not going to make any friends saying that, but I think people should think about it. Thanks.
Thank you. Please, Holly.
Holly Wilson, I'm Vice Chair of the Affordable Housing Committee. I'm on the CPC and I'm on the working group for the Falmouth Affordable Housing Fund. And as far as the funding rounds go, I'm not sure that we were talking about just one a year. Maybe to have multiple funding rounds, and that could work for the developers. Question I had, it could be for Tom Botts or for someone on the planning board. I didn't hear mention, I hope I didn't miss it, about rezoning for multifamily dwellings. And I wondered what's going on with that, because I know it's been on the agenda for the planning board for a while.
Thank you, Holly. The planning boards has been discussing multifamily housing prior to my arrival, and that is largely in the guise of looking at the redevelopment of the Davis Straits area. Multifamily housing is important to be located in areas where there is infrastructure available, both sewer, utilities, and transportation. So having a proactive place to park that stuff is where we should be working towards. 40R is one of those things that I had mentioned before, creating a provision for 40R at the Davis Straits, in addition to the form-based code we've been talking about, has the benefit of creating affordable housing as well as market rate housing. 40R, for those folks who aren't aware of it, it's the stick, it's the carrot the town, the state opts. If you vote in 40R, they give you an incentive for voting the zoning. In Kingston, where we worked previously, we created a zoning district by the train station in a 100-acre sand pit. 720 units of housing, multifamily. For that, the state awarded the town a $600,000 payment, an incentive payment for adopting the zoning. For each unit that's created in the district, market rate or affordable, there's a $2,500 incentive payment as well. So that's the carrot that the state provides for you. Adopt this and we'll help you fund some of the infrastructure needs. That money just goes to the general revenue fund and is not earmarked for anything in particular. And then under 40S, there's a provision if your school formula is tweaked by this influx of folks, there's a formula that doesn't get used very often because frankly, affordable housing typically does not overwhelm your school system in spite of the various memes that say that it does. There's a provision for that to support that. So we are in the midst of moving forward with our help of our friends at the Cape Cod Commission on the form-based code. We recently got a DLTA grant that allows us to develop a framework for adopting the zoning. We'll be working on that over the summer and bringing to town meeting in November a request for funding for the scope of services to develop, hire someone to help with the form-based code. That in mind, that we'd be looking at November of 2020 to actually adopt the zoning and put these things in place. This is where I get back to that statement about we are not very nimble, but at the same time, a well-thought-out plan is a better plan than one that is sort of spirited through quickly. So we're moving towards that with, frankly, at this point, with very little out-of-pocket funds from the town through grants and through working with the Cape Cod Commission. And we'll be working on it over the summer and look forward to supporting it at town meeting in November.
So if, for example, the land around the train station that the EDIC redeveloped, transportation right there, if there were, if the town were interested in putting something like Linda's project with retail down the bottom and housing on top, that would be something that the planning board would look at in the overall plan in terms of where to fit that 40R zoning, for example?
Yeah, in the like I said, the work that's been done to date is focusing on the Davis Straits area.
Mm-hmm.
It's not to say that it's exclusive to that, but I think we want to kind of have that first option that we roll out to see how that plays before expanding. Sort of like the solar overlay district. We've created a solar overlay district in this corridor along Blacksmith Shop Drive. And we're looking at other areas as well. But once again, you want to look at, what are the implications of that? Planners, we are always concerned about unintended consequences. So when we look at creating zoning, particularly zoning for a big picture sort of thing, we want to make sure we're at the right site. Much to the frustration of those folks who wonder, why aren't they moving forward with this? Why aren't they getting those things done?
Well, the blacksmith shop, that came about as a result of a project that was brought to town meeting and wasn't successful. And so when we look at project zoning, I mean, it would be interesting, I mean, I'm just kind of looking at the alternative, which is the community development idea that the selectmen had a while ago, to really look at the entire town in terms of zoning and that, that might have its own benefit in terms of, taking that on the road to the community and say, this is what we're thinking of for your neighborhood or your neighborhood, and that kind of feedback. Is that something that you foresee coming up?
Absolutely. With the recent adoption of the Cape Cod policy plan, we are looking at, and one of those changes in the Cape Cod in the regional policy plan was changes to the local comprehensive planning policy. So I've had discussions with the board about rebooting the local comprehensive planning policy and taking out a robust sort of show on the road with public outreach and these sort of forums to reach out to the community and see what's on their mind, and basically reboot a master plan process. It's once again one of those things. It's a year, 2-year process. You want to be thoughtful about that, and you want to move that along. So these are the reasons I drink coffee and hang out late at night to try to sort of sort those things out. But there's plenty of work to be done as we look at what has already been sort of laid out thoughtfully by the town over the years, and trying to implement those things and then expand on them. So we've got a great opportunity to sort of hit the reboot button on the LCP, the Local Comprehensive Plan, based on the Cape Cod Regional Policy Plan recently adopted.
Thank you. Megan, question, then Heather, if you wouldn't mind.
I just had a few comments, and they've just sort of been from everything we've heard, so they're not all related. But, I think along with sort of what people are touching on is, I think one of the places where we fall short is kind of being able to proactively do two things, which is sort of proactively go out into the community and talk to residents, have some of exactly what you're talking about, to dispel some of the fear and the reaction to 40B projects or affordable housing projects in general. Every time something is proposed, there's an enormous, sort of outcry and a lot of, really just kind of stereotyping and negative, perceptions around what these projects are going to be. And I think if the town was regularly having conversations, talking about what's the character of your community, how do we, most people here want to have affordable housing so that we can have the people who work for the town live here, so that people can stay here, so that, we're not, having to necessarily, we're always gonna have to bring in some workers, but we have to bring in so much of our workforce in the summer because we don't have people who, are staying here in their younger years, or, younger kids kind of home from college doing those things, or coming for college for rentals because there's nowhere to rent. So I think that we need to do a better job laying the foundation, because developers, if they're expected to do that, once the horse is out of the barn, I mean, that's kind of, it's very hard to step the conversation back and really have a good, positive community discussion. So I think it's the role of the town, if we want to support affordable housing, not particular projects necessarily, but to just always be sort of having that conversation about getting the input, hearing from people. And the other part of the outreach is, I think, being more proactive about thinking about properties that might come up, thinking about individuals in this town who own parcels that may have had one life in one way and are looking, have the potential for another type of use, and people who are deeply embedded in this community and really care about it, of which we have many individuals. And it's somewhat to Mark's point where, have the conversations about what some places are better for open space, and some might be better suited for development. And I think we, again, because everybody has a million balls in the air, we don't do that piece of it, which is reaching out, talking to individuals. Properties may not even be on the market, but the point is to have a conversation. Lantern Lane is a really good example of some conversations that might have happened at different times. So I think that for the town to support it, it's not about individual projects. Obviously, those come whenever they come. Those applications are before us, and funding drives a lot of that. But to really sort of lay that foundation and create that community dialogue so that there's a more of an understanding about all the things that we've heard about tonight, more of an appreciation for the challenges, and again, to just be on top of those opportunities before we're racing to catch up, or trying to support a project that is behind the 8 ball or coming with 8 days before we need to respond. So I think there's some work that we can do in that vein. And the last thing I would say is just about rentals, just from another perspective of someone who does a lot of landlord-tenant law, what I hear from lots of folks who are really wonderful landlords and have had, folks like Scoba Rhodes, who isn't with us anymore, but who had like a heart of gold, but was constantly challenged with landlord-tenant issues. And the law is very much stacked against landlords in a lot of instances. And so many people have gone through the process and been really burned and just don't want to do it anymore. And we have sort of a new housing court. It's a very different structure. We're all still sort of getting used to it. One's going to open in Barnstable. But I think that's when some of that education, some work around that could come in to dispel some of the people's fears or make sure that they're entering into it in a way that's going to be sustainable and they won't have one tenant that's a nightmare and then say, forget it, I'm going back to seasonal. So I think there's different ways we can support on those different levels.
One point that I just want to make that Barbara Snyder has raised with me is we were so smart about open space years ago and setting that aside, but we now have many folks who are ready to let go of their big homes and move to a smaller, affordable housing situation. And South Cape, for example, in Mashpee, people often bring up, but Falmouth seems to be really lacking in that kind of market. I hear that constantly. So it be kind of in that, when you think about it, releases homes into the market for young families, and it's a lot of it is really about breaking the log jam, because these are all interrelated concerns. And I want to really hear from the Cape Cod Commission expert on that, Heather Harper, if you'd step up and maybe comment on overview and your thoughts about these particular issues.
Well, I might disappoint you because I'm here as a resident and a member of the Falmouth Housing Trust. I'm happy to come back. I wasn't asked to come as a commission representative, so we're very careful about that. When you invite us to come, I will come and speak. But I do have, and really happy to offer to come back and facilitate a conversation about the regional policy plan, long-range planning for the community. What you really have done tonight is spend a lot of time talking about really important administrative procedures about how to deal with what comes through the door. We can maybe help facilitate a conversation about how to develop what might come through the door, and thinking about developing relationships with the private sector, with employers, with the broader community, about planning for housing supply and planning for affordable housing. And what Tom was speaking of with regard to the Davis Straits project, those really are long-range planning solutions. This is a long-term problem. It's going to need long-term solutions, just like the open space plan did. That happened over 20 to 30 years in the town's strategy for acquiring our open space to sustain the natural environment that we have here that drives the economy. So those things can happen on balance. They don't have to be in contravention with each other. So happy to come back at a future time and talk about that, but glad I was here to listen to the conversation really starting. And I think the second part of this evening's conversation is really the beginning of developing that long-range anticipatory plan to develop what may come to you in the future. In the short term, I was really glad to hear a positive report about the Falmouth Affordable Housing Fund. And what I saw was 124 housing units created through that fund, which is a real accomplishment. And that's another thing I think Falmouth can do more of, is really celebrate its accomplishments. When I look back over 15, 20 years and think back to even 704 Main Street, which is still heralded as a really amazing accomplishment for this community that communities across the Cape look to and say, you can build affordable housing on Main Street, in one of the most successful main streets in Massachusetts, in the Commonwealth, probably in the nation, and have affordable housing and mixed uses right in your downtown. And it happens, and it's homogeneous with your community values. So keep up the good work. Don't look back on the things that are challenges. Look back on building on the successes and work from there. And that, I'm really proud of this community and glad to be a resident. So.
Thank you. And to the town manager, I think we will take up that offer as kind of the next step. So maybe you could inform us after you have a chance to speak with the commission on those ideas. Please come up. And Megan, first, as she's walking
Yeah,
up.
just one last thing. I really hope we take to heart some of the stuff we've heard about kind of streamlining the process and making it easier. I think we have so many tried and true developers that we're very fortunate that we have great relationships in this community, that we know they're going to take a project from start to finish, and they're going to do it sort of with an eye to sort of the way it fits into the community and reflects community values. So I really, I hope that we, all of these things are paper intensive, they're, form intensive, but I hope we can think of ways to really streamline that process, because we want to facilitate it rather than frustrate it. So
absolutely. Welcome.
Thank you. Joan Bates. I am a member of the Falmouth Housing Trust, and I'm a real estate agent here in town. And I have to tell you, those two things have a lot to do with each other. Extremely frustrating to live in this world, work with buyers who cannot find a place to live, to buy, to rent here in our community. And it's oftentimes it's the children of the folks who work here and live here, and they grew up here, and they just can't do it. My son's an example of that. Ma, I just can't do it. I'm moving off Cape. And it's a cold, hard reality of the world that I live in that drives me to work on it. And the one thing I wanted to add of that kind of depressing comment is I think it's so important to imbue in our community who the heck we're talking about. We are not talking about trailer trash folks who are trying to invade us. No, no, no. We're talking about our own people right here now who need a place to live. And it's not rocket science, it's just the reality of it. There's a range of us, there's a range of them, but we need to think more positively about it. And I think one of the keys is to help the community understand who the heck we're talking about, because some of that language, as some of you have pointed out, is so stereotypical and negative and wrong that it creates stupid barriers to doing the obvious things we need to be doing. So that's it. If we focus more on who the consumer is, simple things I've been thinking about, like we should be able to put our affordable housing units as we build them on the MLS. Come on, I'll do it. I don't care if I don't get any commission. It should be on the MLS, because that's going to spread it to all those Zillow sites and Redfin and Realtor.com and my website, the Sotheby's website. It'll be everywhere, and people will know, oh, there's something available. Wow, I didn't know that. Because they oftentimes don't even know that it's available. When we get our one out there, we had 6 applicants for that. That's sad. 6 applicants for one unit? Because the information flow is so hard to push out. So I'm thinking about the consumers, and I'm thinking about our community to better understand who the heck we're trying to serve. It's not rocket science, and we just somehow, a lot of you have focused on, I love that, so I'm nodding and nodding. Thank you.
Doug, did you have something?
I was just going to say, I think we are now putting them on the MLS, aren't we? Isn't that right?
Sometimes. Carla had an idea, and we pursued that, so thank you, Carla, and we should do more of it, please. Step right up to the mic if you don't mind, for the folks at home.
I'm Jessica O'Brien. I'm with the Affordable Housing Committee, and I live here in town. I think incentivizing landlords to rent out their homes year-round is a great idea. Between $2,000 and $2,500 a month can be a lot for, let's say, me, my husband, and my son. But just to give you an example, I currently rent a house. I rent it with my husband, my son, and my mother and my father. And between the 4 of us, we can afford that rent, and we're comfortable, and we're taking care of this house, and we have our other landlord was a friend that was a realtor who she had to sell her house, but we put a lot of work into it. So just to kind of dispel those stigmas that we need these houses for for everyone, you know, for the elderly, for families. And I went to Falmouth High School, I went to college in Boston, and now I'm back. So I just wanted to add that comment in. Thank you.
Thanks for putting that out there. Linda, with your experience, can you read in here? Thank you.
Linda Clark, Falmouth Housing Corporation. Just a few points. Peter's absolutely correct. One round is not going to work a year. For example, the Gifford Workforce Housing, we would have never got that funding if we didn't get a commitment from the town. So if one round is not going to work, I don't know about 2 rounds, but it seems to be rolling kind of thing would be the best course of action. And Megan, your point is, as far as coordination, it would be great, the departments just to coordinate all at once. Like if there was some kind of communication, and I know Carla was hired as the coordinator, and anything should go through Carla. When a developer starts, every single email or transaction should go through Carla, so she understands every step of the way. And I'm not so sure that's happening. Mass Docs, as Carla had mentioned, she was instrumental, so was Peter and the manager's office, getting that online. That's gonna help tremendously. That's gonna be huge for the town. We've already started with Little Pond with the Mass Docs. This is the first project. It's working out nicely. So the funds from the affordable housing, that's all gonna come with the docs and timely. So there's not gonna be any issues with money up front and not getting it back into the company timely. For example, Little Pond right now, we're looking at 90% that's gonna come on our first requisition for construction. So this is huge. So now, a good amount of that money, we don't have to secure the construction loan. That's gonna save us on interest. And then 10% comes at occupancy. So, I mean, there's a holdback, of course there has to be. So that works out nicely. Things are really moving along. And I feel like every department is there in time of need. If you're desperate and you're like, oh, I have to get, they're there for you. Every department within this town has been there for us through a project that took place 4 years ago, Little Pond, that's been in the works since 2016, as we know. And the Gifford Street Workforce, which is coming up, that's kind of taking a back seat at the moment, but we're moving on that. We want to get through Little Pond and break ground. That's the most units, which is 40, and we want to get those online as quick as possible. But, I mean, things, I see the town, and I see the departments, I see the selectmen, town manager, really working hard to fine-tune it. It's not lack of effort, it's just trying to get it all coordinated. And you know what, the Falmouth Housing Corporation is extremely grateful for what the town has done in the funding and just support. Extremely grateful. We wouldn't be, I mean, we wouldn't have all, like 704. We all talk about 704. What a building, 75,000 square feet.
And tell us about, because that, you know, we talk about getting the message out there. What is, you know, affordable housing is all of us, it's our neighbors. Talk about management of 704 and why that is sort of the standard bearer project.
We have 5 people in our office, including myself. We each have a role. We have a housing, a person that handles tenant relations. She is on every property, every day, and deals with any kind of issues that should come up. Any kind of major issues land on my desk. We are very strict in our rules and regulations. As you will notice, you will never see a Christmas light hanging off a balcony. And not that we're anti-Christmas, but can you imagine every different color Christmas light hanging off 3 levels of balconies on Main Street? We're very, we want to appeal to the community. We have landscapers that I walk around with personally every spring, every property. We care for our properties. We take care of them. We are there for our tenants in need. But there again, we're not going to allow our properties to be destroyed.
So a lot of management.
Tons of management. We're there, and
I know you guys manage a lot of properties, but when I hear the need for rentals, I think of you guys. I'm wondering if there's any capacity for another large building. I mean, you got a few large buildings now, but it seems like we're ready to build another large building, and I wonder if we could find some town land or work something out to provide some land somehow and get another large project for next year for you
right,
guys.
that 704 is mixed use.
Mhm.
So believe it or not, it's a condominium. So the commercial units on the first floor are condominiums owned solely by Falmouth Housing Corporation.
Right.
Then we have 44 tax credit units. Then we have 14, the tax credit is condo 1. Condo 2 is 14 units that's owned by Falmouth Housing Corporation. That is 120%. So the 44 tax credit are 30 to 60. The Falmouth Housing Corp is 80 to 120. And then we have the 5 commercial condos. So it works really well. So it's condominiumizing that was the best thing. That was a Bob Murray venture. And it was just, it's great.
But I think it really, to your point, it really sort of sustains the character of that building, because it has so much going on.
It has
And
character.
it's serving so many different needs, right? So people kind of in different places, in the sort of their sort of economic life, and then commercial space. And so I think when we think of those larger projects, that's just that, I know that's where the planning board, and I know, the idea of that mixed use and really just incorporating
Right, so we
that
go from
vision for those spaces.
30% to 120% in the rental market in that building. Plus, we have a daycare, which is a nonprofit, services the tenants. They bring their children right downstairs, then off to work, pick them up, go up to their unit. Then we have a chiropractor, a nail salon, and us, our office.
So I know it's working great, but do you think that your organization would, in the future, be willing to or capable to expand, or are you kind of at where you need to be?
No, we have a vision of continuing our mission. Spring Bars is up next, and then we'll do the workforce housing, phase 1, phase 2.
We'll be looking
so
for
that'll-
something else next year, right?
You're gonna have those both
I don't
done
know
next
about that.
year. Yeah.
So, no,
Just curious if you
we
guys
will
would be
continue
the-
our mission. And once we get underway with Spring Bars and Gifford, we will start looking for another project.
Right.
And 704 is a great model.
Right.
It is.
Absolutely.
Truly is.
Thank you. Anybody else have questions
Thank you.
for Linda? Oh, please, John.
I don't have any questions.
Okay, next then. Thanks, Linda.
Long journey to get over.
It really is.
We want to make sure you're really committed to making whatever statement.
I am. John Drewley, and I'm an elected member of the planning board. I'm also a planning board's representative on the CPC, and CPC's representative on the Falmouth Affordable Housing Fund, and a local real estate developer. So we've talked about a lot of things this evening, and there's some things I wanted to address. Number one is this town lost a great person when they lost Bob Murray. He's the gentleman that was doing the affordable housing in this town that we like so much, and probably lost, I don't know, 10, 15, 20 units a year when Bob passed away. And no one has been able to fill his shoes. When we're talking about trying to solve this problem, money, of course, is one of the problems. And when we wanted to solve the open space, what did we do? Took out a bond. I don't know how much the bond was. I don't know if it was 20 million, 30 million, but the town took out a bond, and the CPC money has been paying off that bond. And next year, 2020, it's not completely paid off, but enough money is set aside to pay the bond off. So CPC will have an additional $2 million a year to distribute. I'm not saying it's all gonna go for affordable housing, but if the town wants to have extra money, it can float a bond. That's one way to do it. And I don't know if there's an appetite for that, but it could be done. A problem that we have for housing here, other than land, is, on the screen, is what to do with the wastewater. And it's always a restriction. And Planning Board has talked about Davis Straits redevelopment, which, when it happens, is going to be huge, but it's a 50-year project, projected 50-year project. But it's going to happen there because it's on the sewer, and already the sewer has limitations on it. So these are problems that have to get addressed in order to have additional housing in this community. And probably the biggest problem that we have is we don't have an appetite for affordable housing. I think every community gets what they want, and this community wanted open space, and it got open space. If this community really wants affordable housing, it'll get affordable housing. Because none of these problems are insurmountable, but taken together, they're difficult to overcome. And we talk about 40Bs. Now, what does a 40B do for a developer? A 40B gives you relief from the density laws. And some 40Bs are great, and some of them are not accepted very well. And I think if this town wants to combat the 40Bs, we should decide ourselves, where do we want the density? Where do we want the apartments? Where do we want additional housing? And that's the planning board's job. And we've talked about it and talked about it and talked about it. I'm a member of the planning board. And I think that we have to have some zoning changes for multifamily housing, apartments. But the then town meeting has to pass it. There has to be an appetite for this, or it's just not going to happen. If we don't have zoning changes, then we're stuck with 40B as our developer for affordable housing. I'm going to give you a couple of examples, and then I'll wrap this up. So I had land in East Falmouth that I purchased in 2004, and 18 and a half acres. And then a couple of years ago, I purchased an additional 7.5 acres. And I thought about doing affordable housing there. And I met with Mass Housing. So I had a total of 26 acres. I met with Mass Housing, and they're proponents of affordable housing, obviously. So they wanted me to do apartments. And they did a study, and they said that I could fit 300 apartments on that land. So my daughter lives on that street, and my grandchildren live on that street. And I thought about it, and I said, I just don't want to build 300 apartments. And what would the neighborhood think if I built 300 apartments? It wasn't on Main Street, but it was off of Main Street, off of 28. And would I live long enough to build 300 apartments? But that's the kind of density that Mass Housing thought would be terrific for East Falmouth, 300 apartments. And without density, we're not going to solve it. Now, the other example is recently the town of Falmouth bought Tony Andrews' farm. So there were 30-plus acres there. And I was a proponent that we take maybe 5 acres and set it aside, not myself, but Holly also, that we take some of that land and set it aside for affordable housing. 5 acres, if you did 10 units per acre, the town could have provided a developer with land for 50 units, maybe more, maybe a little bit less. We would have had 25 acres of farmland, 5 acres of open space, of affordable housing to be built upon. So we've made progress in this town, as has been said by other people this evening. And if we really want to solve the problem, we can do it. But it's going to take money, and it's going to take some density. And I, for one, think that we should decide for ourselves where we want the density. And it's hard because once you decide that, what are the neighbors going to think? Who wants 300 apartments on the street they live on?
Well, I want to just not reply to that question because, of course, it's somewhat rhetorical, but on that concept, you know, I think that what the Board of Selectmen has been saying in its strategic plan is that things, we hope we plan comprehensively. So it's about, as Megan was saying, outreach to the community, which is your point, to really start that conversation so folks know it's our sons, it's our daughters, but also, what is the effect on the community? I think, when a developer gets approval, we require a traffic study. Yet when we do this planning, we don't think about how all these people are gonna get around. Our Main Street are essentially, paved cow paths that Ray Jack has said, we can't take anymore. And so my point is, I think we have to start looking at, comprehensive solutions. As you brought up, water, how are we gonna fund that? How are we gonna move people, traffic issues, all of these things, and then, incorporate it into the town manager's capital plan and the development plan of the town. So your point is very well taken, that, we have to start the education, the conversation, the discussion back and forth now, if into the future we want to meet our goals.
Agreed. And Davis Straits is going to be a great project, but Davis Straits isn't the only place where we can have increased density in this town. And look at the project that Linda is managing. How fabulous is that? It just looks like it's always been there. And there's other locations that, like Doug was talking, that this town could add to the density and help eliminate the housing crisis that we have right now. And as a monologue, on my land, I am building 20 houses. 20 houses on 26 acres, which is a standard subdivision. So, I mean, I have open space there, but instead of doing the 300 apartments, I'm building 20 houses.
Which is probably appropriate for that neighborhood.
Which is what it's zoned for.
Right.
Makes sense. Thank you.
Okay.
I'd like to take maybe two more, just because you made that great comment already. Is there anyone else who hasn't been heard from yet? Okay, the finale, please.
So, Jessica O'Brien with the Affordable Housing Committee. In October, I think that educational piece about presenting this to the town, that's a part of our job in the housing production plan, is to spread awareness and education. We've been working with Carla. We've got a subcommittee group that's actually working on something. It's called the Housing Summit, and it's going to be held in October at the October 2nd in the Herman Room at the Falmouth Public Library. So I'd welcome all of you to come to get some more education on affordable housing. I think that was it. And I just want to thank Carla too. She comes to all of our Affordable Housing Committee meetings and keeps us abreast as to what's going on. She's an integral part of making all of this happen. And I think, will you be at the Housing Summit as well, Carla? I'm sure. Okay. All right, thanks, guys.
Thank you very much, and thanks for everyone who came for this further discussion. We appreciate your input and appreciate all staff and other and committee members here so that we can work together and achieve these goals that we've laid out tonight. Thank you all. The board has a couple more items, but feel free to quietly move out so that folks on the TV don't miss the next section. The next item on the agenda was business Clippership Apartments, and that has been continued to some date in the future. And under administrative orders, if you could speak in the hallway, that would be great. Nobody wants to hear me loud. The next item on the agenda is to vote to approve special one-day wine and malt liquor license, Sunday entertainment license for Quicks Hole LLC Cinco de Mayo, Sunday, May 5th, 2019.
Move approval?
Second?
All those in favor?
Aye.
And finally, a vote to approve a special one-day wine and malt liquor license and Sunday entertainment license for Landfall Inc., Cinco de Mayo, Sunday, May 5th, thank you, 2019.
Move approval?
Second?
All those in favor?
Aye.
I think it starts at 2 o'clock for that event, and Lescombe Avenue will be closed for...
Cinco de Mayo place. Is there a,
Move we adjourn?
Navigator's having Quattro de Mayo.
Oh, yes, yes, Quattro de Mayo at the Portuguese American Association, $20, taco bar, fabulous stuff, so you can warm up for the actual Cinco de Mayo. Tickets are available.
On Saturday the 4th, of
Yes.
course.
oh, right.
Hence the name.
Yes.
They don't really call it that, but I noticed they sent the flyer and I said, Cinco de Mayo.
We like to do
isn't that
things
Quattro de
differently.
Mayo?"
I think it's great coining of a phrase. So there was a motion to adjourn. Is there?
Second?
All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Thank you.
Great.
Thank you.